Hello and welcome. Today we have Decode and we have Juan Savin, and we'll be discussing the CPAC speech. Juan Savin was there. We'll be discussing big tech, the class action lawsuit, the election audits, and also the military and when Trump will be coming back. Now, just before we begin, you can subscribe to my Telegram channel and to nicholasveniamin.com for my free email updates. And I will also leave the link below in the description if you're watching this for the first time on YouTube due to the censorship. Jean and Juan, thank you for joining me. Is this the first time that you've both meeting each other? Is this the first time you're both speaking to each other? Jean, you go first.
Yes, and it's an honor.
And Juan?
Well, and I appreciate that. I mean, that's very gentlemanly of you. And by the way, I apologize, but something about our location was not letting me get on with video, and it didn't have anything that we have any control over here. So we tried a number of things. I sorry about that, but I wish I could for the folks, but that's where it is.
Well, no, that's absolutely fine, Juan, because you sent me a lovely picture last night when you was at the CPAC speech, and I'll be using that photograph if you don't mind, and I'll cover it over your screen. How about that?
Hey, that sounds great.
Yeah. Right. So Jean, I was just speaking to you before Juan came on, before we hit the record button, and you were saying that you think Trump will return back end of August, September, or possibly October. Do you want to tell us why you think that is, please?
Yeah, it's just looking at the, something I've had from birth is to see choices and timeline derivatives from the choices, and looking at the timelines based on what's going on with the intel of what I have on what's going on with certain operations around the globe and what the U.S. military has to deal with. I'm heading more towards the late September, early October timeframe. It's still the predominant timeline that I see. And then the other thing is I'm looking at what has to happen within the country with all the different issues going on, especially with the thing they put in your arm. So there's a lot of things going on. So I'm looking at all of that.
And how about you, Juan? What are your thoughts about that?
Well, I don't want to get into the timeline too much. I will say this, that I am famous for having said that by April Fool's Day, April 1st, that anybody that voted for Biden, prior to even Biden being the candidate, I said the Democratic candidate, because I made these discussions out there well over a year ago, year and a quarter ago, even a year and a half ago on some of them. I actually had bets going, and that I said that Trump would still be president. Well, the reality is that President Trump was never impeached. While they voted for impeachment on the representative side, it was never confirmed on the Senate side. So even though he was voted for impeachment, he was never actually technically impeached. It's like being accused of a crime and then the jury says not guilty. Well, are you guilty of the crime? It hasn't changed a thing. He wasn't demoted. His rank wasn't removed from him. So for the rest of his life, for eternity, he will be President Trump. That said, I didn't say that he would be back in the White House. And I actually was pretty precise with that with a lot of people because there's a fight going on. And so the people that kind of understand this, I actually only had to pay up on one bet so far, and I have several friends that have said, okay, hold on a second. I think he might actually be right. And you don't have to pay me off yet. So, but I have one friend that he wanted to collect while he could. And so with that in mind, looking out to the future, because of what's at stake and where the American public is, trying to lock in that date, it's about a checkpoint more so than a date. There's certain things that have to be completed. It's like driving the road. Well, you can say a time or whatever, but if you're not to that point in the road, if there's something blocking the road, if you get a flat tire, it's still, you have to get the checkpoint before you can make the turn that's up at that checkpoint. We're not there yet. And there is two major things that I personally believe still have to happen. There's going to be an economic crisis, and we don't want President Trump to have to carry that baggage. This is a creation of the people behind the election fraud, and I'm going to use that word, from 2020, that are trying to hold control of the United States with people of their making being put in power. And so we don't want Trump tapped on that because he didn't create it. We were on the way to the greatest economy in American history, practically. And it was the engineered activity that stopped that with the COVID and everything in between. And then with this Biden presidency, moving oil production back offshore, closing down businesses and moving the businesses offshore, reopening the Russian-European pipeline project, things like that. So with that in mind, there's an economic crisis of the making of this current administration on the executive side of government here in the United States and the congressional side. And then the other thing is, and even more compelling and urgent and concerning, is there is a military crisis involving some type of event, kind of like the Cuban Missile Crisis with the threat of a nuclear engagement. The reason that has to happen, or they're going to try to make this happen from a globalist standpoint, from a opposition standpoint, considering, opposition towards the Trump side of things, is because the nuclear command and control here in the United States has not been relinquished to the Biden camp. Congress, a few days after Biden took office, had demanded that command and control of the nuclear forces and beyond, the WMD component of the military, which is a different strata. It's an upper strata of the U.S. military defense system, beyond just the general staff and flag officers and the commands of regular forces. That nuclear and beyond strata was not handed over to Biden at the inauguration and was retained by the command structure pending a review of everything leading up to the election and beyond. And the reason that they did that review and didn't hand over command and control of those nuclear forces is because the director of national intelligence was required. He supervises all the intelligence operations in the U.S. government, in the administrative, executive, congressional side of government, under the executive or the president. They were under an executive order from Trump from September 12th of 2018 to look for using all available assets without a limitation on the budget. All the intelligence agency assets of the 16 intelligence agencies, National Reconnaissance Office, which is satellites, CIA, FBI, NSA, which has the largest budget of all. 84% of the intelligence budget of the United States goes to National Security Agency. And then other agencies, in addition, all available assets by executive order from September 12, 2018, were to be applied to looking for any foreign interference in any federal, which means across the entire country, not just in the state, but any federal election for federal office. They were to look for any foreign interference in that election process and outcome, and then report back to the president and various Homeland Security Agency heads with the report within 45 days of a federal election, any federal election from that point in 2018 forward. 45 days after November 3rd, 2020, was December 18th, 2020. The Director of National Intelligence was unable to submit a report to President Trump or to the other agencies, and said that there was disagreements over what the data meant, what it said. They couldn't get the data together, and they were not in compliance then with this executive order, which was the law of the land at that point in time. They continued to not be able to provide a report to the president and to these other agency heads for the next 33 days. On January 19th, they submitted an incomplete report to the president and the agency heads with only less than 24 hours before the executive office was to be handed over to Biden. Up until that exact moment on January 20th, like an executioner waiting for the governor's call before pulling the switch, until the last second, there were opportunities on the civilian side, the executive office side of the U.S. government, to take action. Congress, the courts, or the president himself could have done something to stop handing off power and contesting the handoff of power for various reasons to being handed over to Biden and Harris. They didn't. And until that moment when he was sworn as the executive of the United States, the president on the executive side of the administration of government inside the United States, up until that moment, they could have done something, didn't. And as part of the presidency, then the military is handed over to the president, as well as a separate strata. This is something that people have to understand, especially outside the country. That's why I'm kind of going into a little extra detail, because I know a lot of people are outside the U.S. government. Citizens here in the United States may understand it a little bit better. And so I want other people in your audience to understand how things are set up. The commander-in-chief is in command of all military forces, but this upper strata of those forces is the nuclear and weapons of mass destruction area. And that's where there's this, what we call the football, this suitcase, briefcase, that has all the communications codes and authorizations codes, so that if generals in secure locations monitoring from satellites, looking for rocket plumes headed for America, or other sneak attack mechanisms in play to attack America, they immediately contact the president as soon as they have certain pieces of information. So let's say that a missile was launched in some part of the world, a submarine, and it's detected by a satellite within fractions of a second. They can tell by the heat signature that it's an aluminized fuel, for example. They can see from its location, perhaps with other cross-reference information, where we know that there's some other country's sub in that area, and that's a threat. Then the generals that are in secure locations, one of them being Cheyenne Mountain, which is a secure facility in Wyoming built into underneath a whole mountain, where if you hit it with a nuclear weapon missile, it kind of bounces off the top. It doesn't get way down, a mile down into the bunker area, and they're relatively safe. So when they detect that launch, they do analysis, verification, look for other sources to secondarily verify it. And within 3 to 5 minutes, they have determined it's legitimate. It's an instant threat, may even have a possible series of targets that may be targeted towards. And now they communicate with the football. In that interim, they're already advising stand by. And people are getting in positions. They're supposed to be within just a few feet of the president at all times, who is also the commander-in-chief. And then As soon as they have information, they're communicating, here's our situation, here's what's being threatened. Do we have authority to launch a counterattack, for example? Now, under President Clinton, we changed our response mechanisms, whereas we would launch in the MAD, mutually assured destruction era, we would launch on notice. Where we saw launches against us, we would respond immediately at some level. Under Clinton, it was changed to we would absorb a first strike, so that if somebody launched something on us, we felt we were robust enough, our facilities were hardened enough that even if it got hit with a nuclear bomb, missile, that we had a fairly good likelihood that most of those locations would survive. And we didn't want somebody to fool us into striking back at the wrong enemy. Somebody could fake, let's say that it's a Russian sub firing on us when it was actually a Chinese, or vice versa. And that actually did happen. Most people have no knowledge about it. I've spoken about it before, that in fact there was a launch on Pearl Harbor back in 1968, on 3/11 of 1968. And it was the beginnings of the whole process that was the Clementine Project, where Hughes had the large boat, the Glomar Explorer, under the CIA's control, building it and deploying it to go pick up K-129, the Russian submarine that the missile exploded in the launch tube. And it was targeting Hawaii, and it was a rogue operation to make it look like China had attacked the U.S. It was actually a Russian vessel under globalist operation. Even the Russians didn't fully know what was being done with their sub. It's a long story. So to stop us from making a wrong response, we now will absorb a first strike. Let me finish this up by saying, in this current situation, the persons in charge of that nuclear and beyond command and control system, where the football's involved, have not agreed that Biden won the election at that moment on January 20th. So they held, and it's based on Military Code of Justice 11.3 and 11.4, which was put into, which was implemented in 1954 for exactly a situation like this, where somebody might be under the control of a foreign party, might be under threat or some type of coercion to not operate in the best interests of the United States citizens because they've been compromised somehow, or in a space alien sense, weird alien worms went in their brain and now they're under the control of the space aliens. And if the military knows this, they're an avatar, they're, captured somehow, knowing that newer technologies were coming out all along. If that was the case, the generals in control of our nuclear and beyond armaments could override an order from the executive or the commander-in-chief, or ignore it because they have knowledge or belief that they're under some type of foreign or alien control. So with that in mind, when they got to January 20th, and knowing that there was not a proper investigation completed by the Director of National Intelligence in a timely manner, which would therefore then be actionable before he was sworn, they paused. Yes, the Congress and the courts certified that Joe Biden won the election, that Kamala Harris won the election. But the military in the upper command, not the general forces, the upper command where nuclear and beyond control resides, did not agree to hand over control of those weapons of mass destruction pending their own independent investigation of the circumstances up to and at the election and the follow-on, because it hadn't been done properly on the civilian executive side of the government over Homeland Security, which is the policing side of the U.S. government, which is aimed internally into the United States. The executive, the president, is the administrator of the U.S. government, administrating affairs from the congressional, which is by House of Representatives that vote for laws and create them, and the Senate, which authorizes the money to do what those laws have purported to do, and the judiciary, this third branch of government that determines, whether or not it was lawful, constitutional. The Constitution is the contract between the American citizens and their government. The government serves the citizens. It's a contract, like a business contract. Here's the things you have to do. And it's the First Amendment, right to free speech, Second Amendment, right to bear arms, on down through the list. That's the contract with the government that the government has to do to be in compliance with the citizens' wishes. And the courts decide if every law passed by Congress and the money that's appropriated is actually in compliance with the contract with the citizens or the Constitution. And then the president is the executive administering between Congress and the courts to make sure the laws get done. It's like a business manager for America, the executive in a corporation, making sure all the affairs work right, but aimed internally to the function of the corporation of America and it being run smoothly and appropriately. That's the executive office. Beyond that, separate from that, is control of the military as commander-in-chief, and then that upper strata of the military as commander-in-chief of nuclear forces and beyond. When we got to January 20th and they did the investigation, in that executive order, if the civilian side of government is unable to fulfill its function, it becomes a military investigation. And on January 20th, with a failure to comply with the executive order, and because we don't have generals running off half-cocked, this isn't a military junta. We're not a South American banana republic. The generals don't do anything. They don't want to go to jail for the rest of their lives for having a coup or an insurrection. They didn't have a trigger legally to enter the fray until Joe Biden was sworn in as the executive, and they would normally have to pass control of the nuclear forces and the military, two separate considerations, to Joe Biden. They didn't. They paused. They did their own investigation, and it was a 45-day investigation, just like was originally intended for Homeland Security. 45 days of investigation using military resources and assets, comparative analysis, vetting, validation of what was in the Homeland Security report and what wasn't on the civilian side, using military assets also. And at the end of 45 days, that was March 6th of 2021. They then have 5 services in the U.S., Army, Air Force, Navy, Marines, Space Force. Each of those forces has a day to present their findings. That brings us to March 11th and the vote and the determination that there was fraud, foreign interference, and that the actual results of the election were not what was said, and read in Donald Trump as the commander-in-chief. They did not have any legal obligation or even a right to make any of that public, because a digital fraud on the vote, an attack on the voting system in the U.S. is the same, according to military law, as a nuclear strike. Its effect is the same as what's intended with any invading army: to come in, occupy the land, install leaders who will do the bidding of that invading force, whether it be locals that have been compromised or external leaders that are brought in a military function to command and control the population. It is an attack, and it is an act of war to interfere in the election, to put outside leaders that are approved by these outside forces. It's the same as an occupying army. So for all intents and purposes, within a legal realm, in a military setting, we are under attack. It's an act of war. The same as if somebody had launched missiles off a sub 2-3 minutes off the coast. You don't know if your leadership, be it the president or some of the congressional people or other administrators, have been taken off the boards, or if a base has been occupied, some targets have been hit and destroyed. You have to do a bomb damage assessment. You have to see what's left of your command and control, who's still viable and who's captured or under somebody else's control. So at the moment that you've determined you're under attack, there's no legal requirement to tell the public, hey, we're recognizing Donald J. Trump as the commander-in-chief. And there's also no military protocol in a wartime setting, which is the way that this would be viewed at a technical level legally. Inside the military, there is no requirement to install the commander-in-chief back as president of the United States. It's a separate hat. In a wartime situation, which is more important, the executive administering whether sidewalks get put in, whether we're building a new bus tunnel, or whether we're, appropriating funds for, the latest trigendered operation, or the commander-in-chief of military forces and beyond, in order to push off an external attack on America. The relevance of all of this conversation is that in this military situation and militarized response, we may think we know what's really going on, but we don't completely, because we can't be told, because there's a cone of silence around a lot of this stuff while that response is put together. So your enemies don't know exactly what you're doing or intend to do next, while you work through the process to capture all of the enemy troops and locations, including on your own soil, and then retake the Hill, which is the administrative side of our government, and recapture control of the country. In the meantime, by the way, there's no vice commander-in-chief. There's no second position. It's commander-in-chief, and that's it. Not like a vice president exists over there. You just need your commander-in-chief. How long will this take? If we're going to have an economic crisis, most of the time those have historically been programmed in by these globalists, these banking people, for fall. And the reason is because they actually have a mentality of spring is for planting, summer is for growth, and you go dark. You just let the plants do what they're doing with a little bit of tending and keep them watered. And then in the fall, you harvest. Mm-hmm. And so they like to harvest in the financial markets. October is their favorite month, and November, that's the harvest season. So if I was saying, well, what has to happen still? We still haven't had our economic crisis, which they've had programmed in for quite some time to create calamity, chaos, crisis in the electorate in America, looking at their retirements going away and who's going to protect that. We need more, help from the administration, et cetera. And then the other thing, this military crisis, where the challenge is in place to try, just like Nancy Pelosi tried to get command and control of nuclear forces put over to Congress instead of to Joe Biden and the executive side. And it was completely blocked because that wouldn't work. You can't have Congress dithering when the missiles are in the air and you got, 25 minutes to make a decision. Right. So that's why we have an executive or a commander in chief. I'm almost done here. And so now if you have a crisis, and you have to think at a global level, because these are people that are trying to take over the whole earth, and America's in the way, and our nuclear forces are in the way. They want to create a crisis where the American public and the whole world is screaming out, you've got to let Joe Biden or the Congress take this situation on, respond, do something to stop some great tragedy, some great crisis. And the military isn't cooperating. Somebody in the military is failing the world by not letting us respond. You have to have some kind of a head-to-head thing. And then beyond that, what I've said with other audiences, and I'll say it with yours, this last statement I'll make here for the moment, and that is, I am looking for a hand of God moment. In Babylon, when the Medes and Persians were in the process of invading the city of Babylon, this huge city, 15 miles long, a couple miles wide in places, where a river ran through the center of it. The Medes and the Persians, that was the most powerful government on the planet at that time. And the Medes and the Persians had come up with the way of creating a brief damming project and diversion of the river running through the city of Babylon under the walls with a landslide, and the water being diverted to a lake area. And about a few hours, the river goes down, the army comes in under the wall, gets to the gate, overcomes the forces at the gate, opens the gates, and the city's being overrun. That's a long city. While that's happening, and they had this huge plan to invade Babylon and take it over, they're having the reason they picked this exact date was because the king of Babylon was having a huge party, and all the officials from all around the region are there with all their harems and their, chauffeurs and their hot rods and everything else. And in the midst of this party, they wanted to do this offense to God by bringing in all the golden utensils from the temple of the Jews, which they had conquered sometime previous. And then they're going to piss on the whole thing and mock God by using these in their pornographic party. Well, in the midst of that, while this invasion is going on, the thing that nobody could have anticipated, and what I'm telling you is in the future here for the world and for America, in my personal belief, is that there's a hand of God moment. Nobody can predict exactly what it is. Even if you have like a sense something's going to happen, God himself is going to surprise everybody. And with the king of Babylon there with all his people having this huge party, out of a cloud, right in the middle of the whole party, a hand appeared behind the king and started writing in the concrete or the stone wall, like we write in clay, "This day your kingdom is required of you, and your life is required of you." Nobody could understand it. Daniel, the prophet, had to be brought in to interpret it. This takes hours. Mm-hmm. During all this crisis, the whole city is so fixated on this hand on the wall moment. And even down through history till today, the thing that we remember about that incident when Babylon fell was the hand of God coming out of the cloud. People almost don't even think about all the drama that was taking place, the war that was taking place right there in Babylon as the Medes and Persians are racing through the city, taking the city simultaneous. God distracted them all, and even the best of the Medes and Persians commanders who had a plan couldn't have anticipated that God himself wasn't going to share the glory for the win with anybody, including them. They were there because God put them there to destroy Babylon, to take it over. And that hand of God moment is what's about to come for America and the world, because God himself won't share the glory of this moment in taking down these monsters that have wielded their way into power in America, as he takes it back for America, we get our house under control. And then we can go help the rest of the world, not to be our brother's keeper, but to be our brother's brother. Mm-hmm. And that timing is probably late fall this year, is my personal belief, but I wouldn't bet the farm on it. Don't go telling anybody I said an exact date. I gave you the fundamentals. It's about a checkpoint. And the thing that we're looking at internally, in order to not have civil war in America, we need 80+%, a very precise number for all sorts of reasons. 80+% of the American people on the same page that they're not willing to put up with what just happened in this election fraud. And it doesn't matter. It's not about Trump even. By fraud, our government has been captured, the control of our government, by foreign parties who had cohorts inside the United States, treasonous, traitorous, seditious people who cooperated in this faked false vote to capture control of our government, not just at the presidency, but down through the ranks in positions all through our government. And it's not a government of the people, by the people, for the people. It's a government that's been selected by foreigners and by black hats, corporate heads, etc., for their interests. And it's not representative of the American people because it was a fraudulent vote. And President Trump has said numerous times, including yesterday at CPAC, including in private meetings yesterday, told us that it was all about 2020. People around him keep wanting to say it's about election integrity 2022. Bullshit. We will never get to another fair election, only looking to the future. We've been down that road lots of times. President Trump has said it. I've said it numerous times. It's in my book. I explained it out in the book. He coded it through with Melania's dress. I've talked to you folks about that before. Back cover of my second edition book. This is all about going through, exposing the frauds of 2020 and reversing that election, but not the way everybody thinks. We actually, at this exact moment, could give a flying whatever about the presidency, because that's the executive side of government. It's all about the commander-in-chief role, because we're at war. We were attacked. It was a digital 9/11. It was a digital Pearl Harbor. We're under complete full assault with the COVID, with the drug crisis, with the invasion at the southern border, with the aliens coming in from countries all over the world, the child trafficking coming in through the border. We're under assault at numerous levels. Shortly, it'll be under the economic. It's already there with pending inflation and supply chain issues, and then some kind of a military crisis. I apologize for being so long, but I wanted to give that. It's a framework for the rest of our conversation. I hope your audience will be understanding. I'm sorry.
No, absolutely. You're very welcome, Juan. Thank you for that. Gene, is there anything that you would like to add or say?
Yeah, quite a bit. So I'm glad I put things in chat so I could keep track. So the 67 launch, that was a fact. And then in January 13th of 2018, the USS, which is a Cabal asset, it was the recommissioned USS La Jolla. It was a CIA asset submarine launched off the coast of Korea on Pearl Harbor as well. And in 1987, under the second term of the Reagan administration, they put up the Star Wars defense program. So the launch of January 13th,
technically called SDI, Strategic Defense Initiative, but popularly called Star Wars. Go ahead.
Now let's do the more proper. Yeah, the SDI initiative was installed so that they were able. We don't have to absorb a strike now. Those two missiles were actually a real launch that was done from the USS Rathbone in a harbor off in Korea. And so it was to make it look like North Korea had launched on us. However, when the blast happens for a weapon, or they take out the weapon, or even in a launch of a weapon now, when within 2 minutes, like Juan was saying, they can now identify the nuclear signature of the weapon. So first thing, they know it's not just a normal weapon, it's a nuclear weapon. Second of all, even on the ground or in a dome, they can identify nuclear signatures. So, missiles going around in trucks and all this that people have been talking, if they're nuclear, they can identify those with the SDI. It not only identifies the launch, it identifies nuclear material. And it can identify it so precisely that it can tell where that nuclear material was refined. So if that came from the US, they can identify it. So that USS Rathbone had a nuclear package of missiles, so that they had signatures for different nuclear missiles for different locations. So it could make it look like it was a Korean nuclear refined missile, or it was a Russian nuclear refined missile. They could go off the shore of some other country and launch. And so it would make it look like it was that country's submarine that did it, when in reality, it was a CIA or a deep state submarine launch. And so we don't have to absorb it due to the SDI initiative anymore. And then they can also identify exactly the nuclear signature, and within a second or two of it clearing the water for a submarine or a silo or anything else, they can identify that there's been a launch. That's why the many countries like Russia and especially Russia, is looking and Russia has developed, I know already, supersonic missiles that are low altitude. They don't go into space, so they can't be they're looking at trying to get around the SDI.
Well, hypersonic.
Yeah, hypersonic.
The lower altitude.
Thank you for the correction. Yeah. Like to remain as correct. So thank you for the correction. Yes, hypersonic missiles, so that are like the missiles that are.
Well, and let me just add, the reason that hypersonic is important is because they're down at the edge of the atmosphere and they're steerable. And so an enemy looking at a flight path that is looking for an interception point, when you can steer with and change directions on a moment's notice at Mach 5 to 8, what happens is you can't send an interceptor to get to it, because it changes direction. The interceptor just flies by, it doesn't get close to it. And so that steering capability, when you have intercontinental ballistic missiles going out into space, they have a burn phase. And when they get to the coast phase, after they've expended all the fuel, the trajectories are very predictable. The only way we get past that is by MIRVing them, which is multiple reentry vehicles. And so the missile has smaller warheads to break off and go different directions. And the idea there is it's harder to pick out which ones you want to get and steer intercepting weapons or technologies toward them. So with a hypersonic missile, the other issue is, whereas particle beam weapons work well in space, they don't work as well down in the atmosphere because of the denser atmosphere. You have to go to other systems. And so it's harder to hit a hypersonic missile at slower speeds. When you're going through space, the speeds are Mach 15 to 18. And is a kind of a comparative speed, and they can be even higher down at the edge of the atmosphere because of the density of the air. You can't go too fast, otherwise you destroy it, burns up the vehicle, and so you kind of have a speed limit with current technology, both for the interceptors and for the vehicles themselves. So it's just kind of a game back and forth that we do. We get a little bit better at this, they get a little better at that, back and forth. But currently, hypersonic missiles mean that we have a hard time targeting them and stopping them. They can steer around our obstacles, and we can't get to them as easy for the time being. We got to come up with better technology to intercept hypersonic missiles. I apologize, but I want your listeners to kind of have those little details that helps them understand where we're at. Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Juan. That was precisely correct. So appreciate that. And then on the, I totally agree with, we're going to see a hand of God moment, like in Babylon. with Agenda 21 pretty much in full operation now with the jab and all of that, and the massive what's coming in the harvest of the fall is I don't just see the economy, but I see, because of like Dr. Northup that you've had on your show, Dr. Tenpenny, Dr. Artis, Dr. Zelenko, and many, many, many others, that it not only creates a change in the genetics, it changes it such that in the fall, when the flu season hits again, there's going to be, it alters your genetic structure so that now with the flu season coming in the fall, their immune system won't be able to deal with the situation. So there's, something, I'm looking at a hand of God moment at some point in there where otherwise we would be hitting what the Georgia Guidestones are saying, like Juan was saying, where they want to reduce. On an interview I was watching where he was talking with David and Stacy Whitehead, where they want to reduce the population to a point where 13 out of every 14 people would be gone. And that's what they're doing with this situation now. So that was planned since way back. I mean, the patents and things go back into 2015. The predictions of it, the requests for it through the World Health Organization, and all of the funding and the grants through the National Institute of Health, the federal government, all of that has set this up way, way before. And, I previously thought that the wet market release was unintentional. You don't put a P4 lab in the middle of a city. That was very intentional, that was supposed to be done, and that they intentionally did that. That handoff intentionally went bad. It was supposed to go bad. And so that was supposed to be released so that they could then have the situation they have now, so that we could be in the situation where they're in the population reduction, but the main harvest would come in the fall. And so I think not only an economic drop, but we're going to see a population drop. And I think only the hand of God will discern. It'll be God's judgment as far as how many and who.
Right. Excellent. No, thank you both. Now, Trump made a very interesting speech in the CPAC speech yesterday. And I'm just going to play some of it. It's only 11 seconds. And Gene, you're going to go first. And then Juan, you're going to go second. I'm going to ask you both. So just listen to this.
Those brand new F-35s and everything's brand new, and we have a great military hordes coming soon, and they won't be able to stop it. But the radical left...
Did you hear that?
Yeah, I'd like Juan to go first. I'll take second. I prefer it.
So
comment as I do. He's much more precise in his detailing. So I appreciate the detailing out of my loose terminology by Juan. So it's a much better one.
I love the gentleman and the humbleness between us. I mean, it's great. This is what we need more of on this planet. I mean, Trump says that, the military, I think something along the lines that they'll be coming and, they'll be taking over. Juan, what do you think about that?
Well, President Trump is this unbelievably good poker player. And why I say that, this is Casino Royale in this round of the games for America. And you have everybody bellying up to the table. And when you're playing Casino Royale, only one person leaves the table with all the chips. There's no second place. And so you're playing the person across from you. Any poker player knows you get the hand that you're dealt, but then you're also trying to decide, has the other guy got as good a hand as I have? Does he have a better one? Does he have a crap hand and he's bluffing? This is this whole thing, and you have to pick your moments. And maybe the other guy has a tell. You play a hand and play a hand and play a hand. You win some, you lose some, you win some, you lose some. You're vying for opportunities where you feel very comfortable with your hand for some reason, and you feel comfortable that they don't have that good hand and you're reading them very well. So that's where you have this poker face where you're not giving the other guy simple signals as to whether or not, oh yeah, I got a great hand. This is the one. This is the one. You're not giving them any good reads hand to hand to hand. And if you are, you're bluffing them a little bit and trying to fool them about where you're at. That's the whole point of good poker between guys. So President Trump, and I like saying it that way because he is still president for eternity, wasn't impeached. President Trump is a master at the poker face and not conveying what he really has in his hand and sucking people into believing a certain thing because they thought they heard what they heard one way. And he's actually saying something completely different and you just didn't catch it, but he told you. And so here at CPAC and other private events, engagements, he repeated over and over, it's still about 2020. We're not moving forward. And as I explained to your audience in that long discourse that I just did, there is no civilian side solution. Congress is a corrupt operation. The courts are a captured, crooked court. The executive office has no motivation to do anything because they've already put their guy in there and the people around them have locked in that position. So the only way that the American people have a prayer of recapturing control of their government would be some type of a military response. And as Mao said, all power emanates from the barrel of a gun. Is it going to be the policing forces under the executive's authority as president, where you have control of the Justice Department and all the policing, U.S. Marshals, FBI, CIA, even, which is supposed to be external, but doing stuff internally, the Congress and the courts? Is it going to be on that side? Well, it's all captured. So the only place left, and even with the broad military going through all the drama with the shots, with the transgender thing, and the command structure permeated, the one place that isn't taken is that WMD level, nuclear level, and that command, which has been locked up, for example, Cheyenne Mountain since March 15th of last year under complete lockdown, and none of the Biden people have been rotated in there. And that's where you start your response back. You look at this situation, President Trump is kind of giving you clues, but with an absolutely straight face, so that when it does happen, people won't be completely shocked that we're paying close attention. And the ones that weren't paying close attention, well, you're along for the ride. But he's giving reassurances to the rest of the public that is paying very close attention, mincing words. They're hearing little things. Why? He wants them to have something to hold on by their fingernails with while this plays through. We haven't forgotten America. He hasn't rolled over and given up. He's not, he's made little subtle comments like, well, are you going to run, get the presidency back? Yep, 2024 or before.
Yep, absolutely. And Gene, is there anything you would like to add?
Yeah, I would like to, definitely, like Juan said, that what we've seen as a takeover of the country in the highest level of Sun Tzu's art of war, in which you infiltrate and replace everything and move the government from a constitutional republic that we had to essentially a oligarchical fascist situation in which a few elite run everything and have a bunch of puppets in every level everywhere. And so they were able to do that all the way up until the nuclear level, like Juan was talking. And there's also a few levels beyond that that are off planet that are now cleaned out and working for the alliance under Trump direction. And so that is continuing forward. And so without that, I don't see how, without that, the lower nuclear level and then the upper off-world forces that are tech that, people have done their research, they know about solar warden, that type thing. So going into that and going forward, without that, we wouldn't be in this situation where we could actually have this totally infiltrated. Without the 2020 going forward the way it had and the fraud, the world wouldn't know that it's not just here in the US. Hungary had the exact same situation. Myanmar, the military actually did take it back, but there's kind of a mixed bag there. So you have this going on, not just now, it's been going on since they put that system in Venezuela with the Skytel and then the Dominion soft, machines and all of that. So this has been an ongoing thing for quite a long time. The world wouldn't know about this worldwide fraud if Trump hadn't played it the way he had. Like Juan said, he's an incredibly brilliant chess player. For me, it's kind of beyond like poker. It's a casino royale or chess game, 5D chess game for the entire, not for me, it's not just the entire world, but at least our solar system, if you're not talking about much more beyond due to the Nazi situation and starting in 1935 with their off-world assets that they had and their bases in Antarctica with base 211. So there's a lot of things going on that we're playing for humanity all over, way beyond what we're thinking just globally. So this is a casino royale for the human race, wherever and everywhere it is, not just globally. It's massive. And so, he has to play it close to the cuff and, to let people know in subtle talk like this and very under the cuff kind of thing. So, it's definitely a play by play where you make a move and you've diagrammed out with these, like Juan had said in an earlier interview, where a genius like Trump, who has a massive IQ, you've got how many derivations of moves time you get 20, 30 moves out in a chess game. Well, a genius can hold in, say, if you're saying that's like 100 million derivations, a genius could hold in 20% of that. These supercomputers can hold in half of that. Only God can hold all of that in and delineate which way this is going to come. So it's definitely, because of the complexity of what we're looking at, there's been things where it was tuned originally for certain timeframes, but the state has done certain dirty missile moves and things like that and other moves. And so it's a massively complicated and, only the hand of God can discern which way and when this is actually going to come about. That's why, like Juan said, I'm kind of loose on the timelines because you can't predict the outcome. We're in the end game now, but you still can't predict the outcome of when they're in Zugzwang. So they will lose. The question is, how far do they want to draw this game down? Do you want to sacrifice all your pieces on the board, or at what point does the enemy want to concede? And the cabal has never been one to flip over the king at an early point. They don't call it, the fake thing you wave on a stick, with a piece of cloth for no reason, because when the British Empire was expanding their realm, they hired and trained their own admirals and sailors to fly different flags from different countries when they come up alongside ships coming out of the New World laden with gold and other commodities. And so then they would board and then they would start trying to take it over. But if they would lose that, they had incendiaries in the hull of the ship and they'd go down with the ship. That's how determined this group is. They will try to burn the whole thing down. And so, like Juan had said when in that interview I was referring to before, is that we can't have a civil war or an out and out war anywhere, because if we do that, that plays exactly into what their hands. That's what they are. You're playing into the enemy's camp. You're playing their game. Then that's what they do. They create war and determine the victor because they're playing all sides. And so we have to play this really, like Trump is, really under the cuff and really smart.
Absolutely. No, thank you very much, Gene. Juan, you was at the CPAC speech yesterday. Were there any comments made by Donald Trump in his speech that were clues that you would describe as clues that you would like to share with the viewers?
I think in everything that President Trump said, he repeated over and over again, even though he has advisors close to him who want to talk about election integrity in 2022 and we got to fix the vote in the future and everything else. He could not have been more exacting and precise over and over and over, both in the public meetings and behind the scenes meetings. He specifically reiterated every opportunity he could get. This is about election fraud 2020 and getting to the bottom of it. And the people around him that many of us are aware of have been saying, no, we just got to give it up. You got to. I was in meetings in D.C. here a few weeks back, and people that meet with the president, every week or more. And they were saying he just can't get off election 2020 fraud. He just won't give it up. He won't, move on. Well, there's a reason why he's not moving on, and they're not getting it. They're on the other side of the firewall. He knows what the rest of the story is, what's about to come. He's actually giving them room to come to his side of the discussion, and they've been slow to understand or figure this out. But Trump understands something a bit bigger. He's trying to give them room to get on the right side of history, because the reversal. I did a bunch of shows here last year, over a year ago, on the 17th book of the Bible, which is Esther. And the book of Esther is all about reversals. It's also all about the flip boomerang. And so you can go back and listen to those shows, and it's explained there. This is about, and I compared it to election 2020. It's going to look like it's all going one way, and then there's going to be this flip, this reversal, and it's going to go completely the other direction. So a lot of people in positions of power and authority here in America haven't yet grasped what's about to happen. And it's going to get more desperate before it gets better, because I did other shows talking about this near-death experience for America. Well, anybody that's gone through an actual, for real near-death experience, one of the common themes is that at the last possible second where they were in a bad near-death experience, where they'd gone to hell, and they'd say there was just, if there'd been there just one moment longer, I would never have gotten out. And then by the grace of God, some event happens, and they cried out to God, please save me, something, when they knew it was at the last possible moment, and they're saved. This, for America, is about a near-death experience. And I do want to separate when we go through what we're about to go through as a nation here in America and complete this phase. The world isn't won. This isn't all over for the world. We're just in the clean our own house up, recapture control of our own house, swept clean and reoccupied by the American people without these demonic monsters running our country. But there's still a battle and battles ahead to retake control of the world from these globalists who they're really Satanists who seek to enslave us as a planet forever. And so to think that this is all over in a few months is not to understand the magnitude of the situation. We didn't get here overnight. We're not going to get it undone overnight. This is just about recapturing the helm in the ship of state here in America. At the most critical areas inside the bowels of the ship in the engine room, the monsters haven't actually got that. But we still need to get control of the helm, and this is a process. And before we regain that control, we have to take a bunch of people into custody and go through the legal, judicial process. But we can't do that on the executive side of the American government's operation, because that's captured, corrupted, controlled by enemies who come in and capture the control of the civilian side of government, the executive side of government, which the president is the executive of the United States. The command and control of nuclear under the commander-in-chief is where we start. Then as we recapture control within the military, because that's not completely under control of the commander-in-chief at this point in time, of either side, then we can have the military justice that's necessary to regain control of the rest of the ship of state of America from these foreign masters or would-be masters that have invaded and taken positions of authority across the country. That's this chess game, if you will, of getting control of locations, cornering pieces in an area of the board, and then systematically taking them out. When you're playing 5D chess, it's about almost like a football match in the European British type of a system, where you have to do a scrum, protect a certain move piece, and then move it to the other end of the field in order to get the score. And that's the way we're doing this chess game. And we're picking areas of the board, getting control of it, and then moving to other areas of the board, getting control of it. It's a process because it's not just two-dimensional. It's multi-dimensional. It's not even 3 or 4-dimensional. It's 5D chess. Not even 5 boards, but 5D.
Right. Thank you, Juan. Gene, is there anything that you'd like to add before I move on to my last question, please?
Sure. I find it amazingly interesting, like Juan said, the correlation to the book of Esther with Mordecai and Haman. And we have a Haman, always Haman, in who supposedly most people think is the president, who we know the inversion in the book of Esther of how Mordecai and all of that came about. And so totally agree that without, we take first, we've got, as the boards had said, the 17 board said that without the America goes, so goes the world. So first we have to take back the country, but then we have to make the world great again. We have to take the world back from these Satanists. It is definitely, from my research and with the dumbs and all of that, if people realized what was beneath the feet, especially in Africa, in South Africa, the level of what's down there is beyond satanic. It's so horrifically evil. It's satanic at a level I didn't even understand existed when I first learned about Satanism, that I didn't realize the depths of evil that this cabal is and how horrifically, massively evil they are, and absolutely free of any kind of moral compass or compassion or discernment about others other than them, their own chain of command under Satan. So it's definitely, that's what we're up against. And, we have to really, really be rooted solidly and have a moral compass in this. We cannot do what the cabal does and let the ends justify the means. And that's another thing that I really recognize and admire about Trump, is that it's not about getting the job done. It's about getting it done with morality and correctly, with as much compassion to the average person and as much understanding and the least amount of damage as possible to the infrastructure and to humanity as a whole worldwide, not just in this country. You can see how he is very respectful, even with way ups in the cabal, where he talks about them. Oh, I had a great time, when he comes back from some country that has a very dark and evil person. That's an amazing person. He's really compassionate, considerate, and respectful. So it's one of my primary role models is to try to be respectful in the manner that he is and to see the good. But for me to see the good in these incredibly decrepit, evil Satanists is, I don't know how he does it, because it's beyond me, because of knowing the things, not just the things they've done, but the volume of it is beyond comprehension. So thank you, Nicholas. And thank you, Juan. Very, very appreciative. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Gene. So my last question, Juan, this goes to you, and then Gene, you can answer as well after this. So do you think, Juan, it is reasonable to assume that Trump and his administration will reveal the audits of the recounts of the 2020 election once he has sued big tech in order for the information to go out officially to the public?
You're not going to get through the legal process soon enough to do that in any viable technical way that's going to be satisfying to everybody. That's a long process. There's lots of blocking moves, et cetera, that can happen in there. And the reality is, you're not going to win this except a hearts and minds level where the American public may agree that the data, the information, the data points is sufficient that nobody can really argue that this was a stolen, fraudulent push on our vote. So you're not going to get courts and everything else to actually agree with that. And even then, there's no mechanism in the court system, really. There's people, I've heard all of the stuff, I've talked and had these discussions about the legalities involved in changing the way the electors voted, reversing stuff. But the reality is that on the mechanics, it's, almost impossible to see a way forward on the judicial side of the American government, on the congressional side of the American government, to remove Biden as president and install Trump as president. And it isn't necessary. That's the part that even if you want to go through all those gymnastics, those mental gymnastics, to find a way forward to do that, the political willpower, the people involved are so vested, they're so creative in finding ways to block and maneuver that no real change would happen there timely. By the time you have that fight, it's a version of civil war in America. And in the meantime, everybody's burning down the cities and shooting everybody else up over who's actually going to run this operation. In order to keep the country from falling into that type of chaos, a multi-year type of a thing with this communication stuff in play, the only way that was ever going to work, and this is what people have to keep in mind, take a deep breath and understand when it happens, is that once the American public has reached consensus above 80% of the voting adult population, that this was a fraudulent vote, that it was a stolen vote, that 2020 can't be allowed to stand, they will then be supportive and in step with the military component coming in and taking control of the country for a period of time, because the administrative side of the U.S. government is a captured operation, not functioning properly, and with numerous traitors, seditionists, treasonous people involved there that have to actually be taken under military control into military custody for tribunal type trials, not a trial in a regular court system with a crooked court, a captured court, but under military jurisdiction. And the cohorts down through the ranks looked at, and then administration falling to the military side to get the country back under control because we're under attack. It was an act of war against America. Our military has to step in and protect the Constitution, the contract between the American public and its government. In this case, the military stepping in to protect the people during this intervening period until the dust settles. And then we see who's left that's still legally viable within the civilian side, and then find a way to conduct new elections to, in this new terrain, install people back in the civilian side of government, and then the military, according to the Military Code of Justice, as quickly as safely possible to reconstitute, install lawful civilian control over the governing processes of the United States government. In the interim, the military has the ball while they get things reorganized and stable as quickly as possible to have civilian elected officials running the country. But because we're in a wartime state, commander-in-chief is the critical role. And if you can't work with the communications companies, Facebook, Twitter, the various TV broadcasting groups and all that, you just shut it all down. Go to an emergency broadcast period, and then retake those locations that may be under control of enemy provocateurs. And it's not going to be for years, it's going to be for days, and then restart and allow the communications to go forward with those groups that are in compliance, or with other groups that may step to the fore to do their work. A lot of this stuff I talk about in my book, and the second edition is out. You've seen that. I've probably talked about it enough at different times. That second edition is going to be available for just a little bit longer, and then we're going to the third edition sometime here in the near fall. And so, it takes several weeks to get them out, especially overseas where you guys are at. So, and that won't last too much longer. So if there's people who want to get it now, it's beautiful. And then anticipate the third edition, which is all new material in it, and that's the Storm edition. And I think it's going to be a lot of fun. But I talk about this stuff in the second edition book. And, prayer. Understand that what the military is doing isn't because it's a coup, and it's not a banana republic move of generals to take over the country. It's an interim thing because we're under attack. We have to support that here inside the country and people around the world. I just thought, did you see all the riot, essentially protests, I should say? They don't tear anything down or burn anything up, but the people in Cuba yesterday saying, this is our country, we're taking it back, and sending Raul Castro a little message there, because they're tired of this crap going on in Cuba, of all places, Cuba, and they're carrying U.S. flags around all around the country because they have had it. They have finally had it. And I think that's what we're going to find in other places. But first, we have to get America, our own house, in order. And then we can go out and help others around the world who want to be free of these tyrants, not to be their masters, but to be their brothers, to be our brother's brother in retaking control of the planet for we, the citizens, the people, and not for these people that would be our masters and controllers and tyrants.
Thank you, Juan. Thank you so much. Jeannie, would you like to make any comments?
Yes. Again, what we saw was the highest art of war, of taking a country without a single shot, and they're looking at that for the world. And so how do you undo this? Is you've got to, standard military ops as being in the military for 20 some years. You got to retake your comms. If that means you have to do optics first of court cases to make people aware, because you've got to get 80% of the American voting public awake to what's going on. How Trump primarily got the people awake in the first place with social media for the first time. So now that that's gone, you've got to make the optics available to make sure people understand that that's no longer available and not really there. Additionally, you have to retake the ground. You got to take your pivotal command centers back. They have Cheyenne Mountain completely locked up and locked down since this occurred, and the situation there. And so you have to then also go through your own military structure, clean out any infiltration within that. And so before you make moves, you've got to make sure that's done as you go from the top down. The top's still clean at the military and the above level. So you've got to go down and clean out the lower ranks while you're putting the optics out so that you have these big cases. I agree with Juan that we don't have the time to be involved with years of battle in court. It could be trillions of dollars suit when we get to the end with the social media and the big tech and all of that, and it likely will, but you've got to clean that out first by first doing a military situation. And it's going to be through the military, like God quite frequently does, is use the military, like we saw in Jericho and all of that, where you clean up the situation through the military and by reestablishing comms and taking down and taking pivotal command centers and then working your way out. But you have to have the people awake to that situation first. And, like Juan said, and I was looking for the footage, somebody sent it to me of the footage from Cuba where the people are taking to the streets and they're done. And the American people got to get to that point where peacefully, like they did in Cuba, they take to the streets and said, no more, we're done. We don't want this satanic cabal here anymore. We don't want communism, fascism, whatever ism you want to call it. We want a representation like we had put in and installed by the founding fathers, which for me, the original Declaration of Independence and the Constitution as it was originally written for these United States for America, not the caps and all caps of corporate entity and that, was a inspired document, inspired by God. And so we need to get back on and then the American people, have to understand the optics too, that we, it's like a video I saw, a music video where what happened to America? We put our Bibles down and we tuned into Xbox and all this other satanic entertainment that is to divert us from the truths and from the foundation of who we are in this country. We trust in God here. And so we have to trust back in God, like Juan said, through prayer and through understanding that, the satanic God is not a God. He is a lesser being. And there is only one God that created all things. And that if we take a knee, it is a mass in this country and go back to the foundational principles that we trust in God first, then God will move for us, just like he did in, Babylon, just like he did in, throughout the Bible with Moses, with Noah, on and on and on. It's only this hand of God coming that's going to pull this out, because this cabal is so massively, even with the 4 years that it was starting to be disassembled, plus 10 years prior to that with the upper levels above nuclear and cleaned out off planet and all of that. It's only through the power of God, the creator of all things, that we're going to pull this out. So I think it's pivotal. The pivotal move that has to happen first is for 80% of the people to wake up and pick back up their Bible and pick back up their prayer and get serious about being in service to God and to be serious about respecting as you're supposed to be and taking care of your neighbor and not being all about yourself and going me, and mine, and not realizing we're in this all together. This whole planet's in this. And if we continue in that mode of self-service, that is the cabal's mode. We brought this on ourselves by allowing ourselves to be mind controlled, like Carlos Castaneda said in his book. I believe it's The Eagle's Gift. The trick the enemy did is they gave us their mind, a mind of all about myself first and not about I'm my brother and sister's keeper. through the power of the Creator that gave us in certain inalienable rights, like it said in the Founding Fathers said. We were given certain unalienable rights. Unalienable by who? By God. They are given to us by God. We are not property. We're not chattel. We are not certificated, title, deeded commodities to be moved around and under and above this planet and trade. So we need to take back our sovereignty that was given to us, as affirmed to us by the Founding Fathers, but was given to us by God. And it's only through our solid prayer that this will come about. So, I totally agree, is that with Juan, that, as he said so many times, that, through prayer, we'll see the hand of God laid on this country, and this country put upright, and then the world. So praise God, and, thank you. God bless.
Thank you, Gene. Gentlemen, it's been absolutely a wonderful honor to have you both at once doing an interview. Is there anything that you would both like to say to the viewers before we finish? Juan, you can go first.
Hey, I greatly appreciate getting a chance to talk with your audience every time I'm there. And I appreciate that there's these are folks that in large measure are outside of the U.S. Directly. And so I appreciate a lot the opportunity to talk with them, help them understand what's going on here inside the U.S., put it in some kind of perspective. I apologize if I'm a little bit long-winded or repetitive, but a lot of times we have new people in the audience that may not have heard other presentations, and I don't want there to be a lot of misunderstanding unnecessarily. So I try to lay that groundwork each time, so that we're not having a conversation with assumptions, but it's based on things I've precisely said. There certainly is people with lots of different views, more expansive views on some of the stuff. I'm trying to hold for myself to the specific things that relate to this exact moment and what's about to happen and why. And the most important thing that your listeners can do, because what happens in America does affect the rest of the world. And we want to be our brother's brother and help in other places in the world. This is a moment for prayer. We're in a precarious situation. In a situation like this, at any given moment, there's 1,000 things that can go wrong with the best laid plans of sincere, God, minded people. There's all sorts of wild, bizarre moves and counter moves that could be in play. At the end of the day, that's why I say there's going to have to be a hand of God moment, even yet. And I would be asking you to pray for the leadership in America, for the American people, that we won't be thrown off, that they will not get us deterred from the direction that we have to go, because as America goes, so goes the rest of the world. We need America intact. We need our leadership to be godly, right-minded, and then we can come to be our brother's brothers for the rest of the world. There's horrible tragedies and crises taking place in Lebanon and Nigeria, really across Africa in many places, and throughout Central and South America. It's horrendous, some of the evils that are happening, especially to children. There's more slaves on planet Earth right now than ever in human history combined. We have more slaves right now than ever. How can that be allowed to happen in this so-called modern era? That cannot happen. That cannot be allowed to stand. We have to stop that in our age, or we share and bear the guilt of it. We have to get our act together, consolidate our forces, and stop these monsters. And it's in our era, our age, our lifetime. Someday, God willing, our children and our grandchildren and our great-grandchildren will look to us and ask, at that most critical time in history, what were you doing? Where were you? How did you act? to save the world, or didn't act and left us in this horrible calamity. Generations that haven't even been born yet will either bless your name, bless your existence for having done the fight at this critical moment, or curse you for not having lifted a finger to protect them in the ages to come. This is our moment. We have to own it. Be God's children, be the man. Let's get in the fight. Let's take our planet back for the generations that we haven't even seen born yet.
Thank you, Juan. And Jean, over to you. Is there anything that you would like to say to the viewers before we finish?
That was quite eloquent. Other than that, I would say be the man and the woman that God created you to be, and stand up and be heard, and let your brother and your sister in God know the truth as much as you can. I know it's hard to wake people up. I've been trying to do this for 30 plus years, but we're now getting at a tipping point where, 30 years ago, I would be able to wake up 1 out of 1,000. Now I hit, every 3 or 4 out of 5 people already know this. We're heading towards the 80% mark. And so I don't see anything stopping what's coming, but we need to leave a legacy. And when you get done and you leave here, I know from my death experience of 30 minutes that what you take with you, like the cabal thinks they're going to take all this with them. The only thing you take with you is what you left behind, in what you shared and how you helped others, and your greed and all that other stuff, and the depravity you leave behind of what if that's what you leave, you're going to have a rude shock coming when you leave your form, your physical form. So leave a legacy behind in which you can lift up your head to God and say, I did my best, and I stood up for what was right, and I stood up for God's laws and the laws of the children above, the rights of the children above all. Like Juan said, the amount of trafficking is literally, people wouldn't even believe me if I said the numbers that I know that are being held in the domes in Africa. The number is so massive, it's beyond comprehension. And so, we have to make this so that our great grandchildren can look back and have, not going, wow, why didn't you do anything? Instead of, I am so proud that you stood up for what was right and that you did God's calling. And so I couldn't say it any more eloquently than what Juan said, other than that little piece. Thank you, and God bless us all.
Gene, let me just add one thing. People are always saying, God bless, and God be with, etc. You have to be in a position for blessing. And if you can't raise your finger to protect the innocent, remember, over half the slaves on planet Earth right now are children. And most of those are sex slaves. They're crying out, asking God for something. Please come get me. Please come help me. That's us. That's the ones that God would send. You want God's blessing, God's protection, God's supply, then you have to do things that are in alignment, in step with the will of God. It is not the will of God that tyrants rule, that children are slaves, that pedophilia is rampant. And so we have to, if you want God, if you want to be in the will of God, you have to go do things. You don't have to ask God, should I stop child sex trafficking? You just do it because you know what's right. And if you don't know what's right, you're not even paying attention. If you know what's right, you should have to be doing it. You don't have to ask those kinds of directions. You don't need that kind of direction. Stop it. Not on our watch. And then God will lift his hand to protect you. If you'll lift your hand to take care of the innocents, that's our job right now. That's what is ahead for us. And the only reason for saving America and saving the world is because we're doing the will of God. the fact that this stuff is happening has us out of step with the will of God. Those of us that are awake and aware need to be moving quickly now to do that which we know to be right, and thereby obtain the protection and the blessing from God Almighty.
Thank you.
Exactly, Juan. You have to look in your heart and your soul and know what's right and do the right thing. That'll be our lesson and our legacy. And so, as we say in the military, Godspeed. So, if with finding the grace of God within ourselves to do the right thing.
Godspeed, faster than the speed of light. Godspeed.
Gentlemen, it's been a wonderful honor to have you. Thank you very, very much. You're both doing fantastic work. Thank you, and God bless. And we'll speak very soon. Bye-bye.